Hey guys, welcome back to the MCU HQ, and this is going to be a review of all three Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, the Holy Trilogy, whatever you want to call it. This is my supercut of the Spider-Man Trilogy reviews. I'm going to review that in this video in anticipation of Spider-Man No Way Home. I am going to get to the two Amazing Spider-Man films starring Andrew Garfield, but that's not this video. That should be up hopefully not too long after this video, because I do want to get it up before the new movie comes out. So grab some popcorn, because this is going to be a long one, going through all three of these films. Like most people, I grew up with this trilogy. The first one released when I was not even a year old, and the third one came out when I was I 6 when I came out? I was either 5 or 6 when I came out. Depends on what month. I might have been 5. So when I was old enough to watch them, I started watching them and I loved them. And that's what I had until I ended up seeing the Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man, the first one. And you know what? I did pull them out for this video. These are the copies of these films that I watched. I had the Spider-Man 3 copy, the longest. But these are all in really good shape still, which is surprising, because when I was little, I didn't keep anything in good shape. And I haven't upgraded these to Blu-ray, and I've never seen the editor's cut of Spider-Man 3. I've just always watched the theatrical cut of Spider-Man 3. But there we go. They're sentimental. I've thought about getting newer versions of them, but I can't bring myself to it. These are the ones I've been watching since I was a wee lad, and I'm not a wee lad anymore. But what's funny is that I saw these films completely out of order. I saw Spider-Man 3 first, and the reason I remember that is because in the opening credits, when it's recapping the first two movies, I didn't know who Green Goblin was, but there was a shot of him that it doesn't look like him at all, but when I was little, for some reason, I thought it was Mr. Dickovich. It was the shot when he dies on his glider. Thought that was Mr. Dickovich falling asleep or something. I don't know, I was weird. But that's who I thought it was. And so it wasn't until later that I saw it, and then I was like, oh, that's Green Goblin. And then also, I was confused why Harry hated Peter, because in one, they were best friends. That was because I hadn't seen 2 where he's unmasked. So I saw 3, then 1, then 2. I don't recommend watching the last installment in a trilogy first, but I loved Spider-Man 3 when I was little. But we aren't here to talk about these in the order I saw them. We're here to talk about these in the order that they released. So let's kick this off by talking about the original Spider-Man.
Do too much. You're not Superman, you know.
Spider-Man is nothing short of iconic, and it is one of the superhero movies that paved the way for what superhero movies would become. I mean, before them, we got the Batman movies, but those died in 1997. Superman died after Superman 4, and Superman Returns had not come out yet, and then Superman died again until 2013, but that's beside the point. Blade was in 1998, and people liked it, but it wasn't massive from what I have heard. And then X-Men came out in 2000, and X-Men was great. X-Men 2 did not come out yet. So then Spider-Man came onto the scene, shot kind of like an indie movie. It was treated like an indie movie, and it was amazing. And Spider-Man is one of the main movies that led to superhero movies learning just how good they can be and paving the way for superhero movies. There is no other way to start talking about Spider-Man than to talk about the first person who ever played him on the big screen, Tobey Maguire. Tobey Maguire is still to this day my favorite Peter Parker. Inside the suit as Spider-Man, I think Andrew Garfield's better, but Tobey Maguire is my favorite Peter Parker. I think he hits all the values of what I think of when I think of Peter Parker. And I mean, he defined Peter Parker for like a whole generation of people. And yeah, I still think he's the greatest one we've had outside the suit. Not gonna get into a comparison in this video though. That's a video for another time. It's not a video I'm gonna make though, so find someone else. But I will say that there's one thing about Peter Parker in this movie that I wish they included, and that's some scenes showing off just how smart he is. I mean, we see it in 2, we see it not in 3, but we see it in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, and we've seen it in some of the MCU movies, that Peter Parker's really friggin' intelligent, but they don't really show that much in this movie. They do show his artistic ability, though. They show his freakishly good artistic ability. As someone who was introduced to Spider-Man through these movies and was introduced to the origin of Spider-Man in the first movie, I went up until 2012 with only the knowledge of this movie for what Spider-Man was. Now, what that means is that until 2012, I thought that in the comics, he shot webs out of his wrists and didn't have web shooters. I think my sister actually still prefers organic webs to the web shooters. I'll have to ask her. Do you prefer the organic web shooters that Tobey Maguire has? Or do you prefer the web shooters that Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland have?
Tobey all the way. I didn't like the fake one.
I mean, it makes sense in a way. If Peter Parker gets bitten by a spider and he gets all the powers of a spider, shouldn't he have the ability to, shoot webs? Although you would think then he'd be shooting them out of there and not out of here. A few other people have touched on this, but it also doesn't make sense for this kid who is dirt poor to make web shooters. Like, I think Tobey Maguire even said in an interview, he said if Peter Parker was able to make these web shooters, he wouldn't have money problems. I can't talk about Tobey and not talk about the rest of the cast of this movie. Some of the casting choices in this movie I think are some of the best casting choices of all time. One of the most notable ones is Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin. But that leads me into the most disappointing thing in this movie, and that is the Green Goblin's costume. It looks like a Power Ranger, but the costume itself is fine. Everything from here down is fine. My issue lies with the helmet. Why did they put Willem Dafoe in a helmet? You don't get someone like Willem Dafoe and cover up his face. You just don't do that with Willem Dafoe. Let him utilize his face in that performance. He's so much creepier when he's not in the suit. My favorite Green Goblin scenes are the scenes when Norman's not in the suit and he's having Gollum-esque discussions with himself. Like in the mirror, it's Norman talking to the Goblin. Those are my favorites. And the laugh, my God, the laugh is just on point. No one has been able to do a Green Goblin laugh quite like Willem Dafoe.
Imagine if he joined us.
I'm so excited to see him again. Green Goblin and Doc Ock are going to beat Tom Holland so bad he'll wish he never got that spider bite, and I can't wait to see it. What's crazy is that Willem Dafoe was not going to be cast in this role. He worked really hard for it, and he kept telling Sam Raimi he wanted it, and finally Sam Raimi gave in. He's like, okay, fine, we'll audition you, and they auditioned him and screen tested him, and he got the part. And I cannot imagine this movie without Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin. It would probably be a worse movie. And I saw a tweet, it was a Doc Ock, Mysterio, I can't remember who, the Vulture and Green Goblin, and they said, who's the best villain? And everyone agreed that Green Goblin's the best villain because he did the most savage thing a villain has ever done, which is blow a hole in the side of Aunt May's house and then force her to finish her prayer.
Deliver us! Finish it! Finish it!
Evil!
And when I was a kid, I did not enjoy this part. But I think the all-time best casting decision would be J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. Every line he delivers is golden, and he says everything like super fast and aggressively. In fact, he was so good that they kept him around for a completely different Spider-Man franchise. Does that make him the first? I think that makes him the first person to play the same character in two different superhero universes. Like, it's the same character but not connected. I think he's the first one that's done that. And then also worth noting, Rosemary Harris is the best Aunt May by a very large margin. And I think the beauty of the world of Spider-Man is just how lived in it feels. This doesn't feel like a new world. It feels like a New York that has been around for a long time. Flash has character. He has a rich character, rich history. MJ's the same way. You learn right off the bat that Harry and his dad don't get along that well, and that Aunt May and Uncle Ben are really sweet, warm, loving people. Their house reflects it. They reflect it. The way they talk reflects it. Peter is kind of an outcast. People don't really like him. Jameson actually does have a heart of gold when he refuses to throw Peter under the bus when Green Goblin asks to take pictures of Spider-Man. Everyone, even down to the fat guy eating a jelly donut, has character and history, and that is reflected in every inch of this movie. And that elevates it so much. And that also allows them to start getting into so much character work right away. They just dive in and just start laying it as it is, and then they start talking about characters. Peter gets bitten by the spider like 10 minutes into the movie. That's how quickly they move it along. This movie is paced like Godzilla vs. Kong. I know that doesn't sound like a compliment, but it is. Godzilla vs. Kong is a ridiculously well-paced movie, and so is Spider-Man. Peter Parker doesn't even become Spider-Man until I think like an hour into the movie. But the movie up until that point never once feels slow because it's written so well and there's so much good drama and writing in there that you don't feel like you're waiting for the movie to hurry along until he's Spider-Man. For the entire non-Spider-Man part of the movie, you're just invested in Peter Parker and his world, and that is the correct way to do Spider-Man. And I think it's such a neat touch that Peter gets his powers and Norman gets his powers back to back. It's like the story of Spidey and the story of the Goblin run parallel to each other. It's pretty cool. And we all know this movie has one of the most iconic scenes ever. I think it's actually something that shows up if you listen to like greatest movie line compilations. And that's this.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
But that's not my favorite scene in the movie. I know a lot of people, that's their favorite scene. That's not my favorite scene. My favorite scene is the scene on the roof between Spider-Man and Green Goblin, when Green Goblin says,
"In spite of everything you've done for them, eventually they will hate you."
Great line. And it's true. Welcome to the world. You know what another great scene is? The scene that inspired me to release this video today. But let's be real, almost every scene in this movie is great. Now, the movie does have that 90s cheese going on. I can't not talk about the 90s cheese in this movie. But at least the movie's aware of that cheese. Like, the movie is intentionally like that. It's not just an accident that Sam Raimi made a cheesy movie. He knew what the hell he was doing, and I think it works, honestly. I think the movie is so fun because it has the 90s cheese. I mean, it works. I mean, he's a dude who was bitten by a radioactive spider, and now he dresses in spandex, and he swings through New York City, and he fights villains like a dude with giant arms coming out who's called Dr. Octopus, and he fights a Power Ranger on a glider. I mean, it all fits with cheese. The CGI, not perfect. I watched this with people who didn't realize this movie came out in 2002, and I got pissed off when they were making fun of the CGI. But yeah, I mean, it's not the best CGI, but I mean, hey, they convincingly made a man swing through New York City, So weird CGI bits aside, they pulled that off in 2002, and a lot of it was real. I mean, sure, Spidey was CGI, but like for the big dips through New York, they shot it like they shoot sporting games with the camera on wires and just run it through. And hey, I'll say this, at least the CGI is better than the final battle of Black Panther, a movie that came out 16 years after this one. And I think this movie has one of my favorite comic book movie fights, and that's the final fight between Spider-Man and Green Goblin. Not the part where he's holding the web and dangling the like gondola and he's holding MJ and it's all on one web. Not that part. I mean, after he saves everyone and it's just him and Green Goblin fighting. But yeah, after he saves everyone, Green Goblin grabs him and they're duking it out. And it is the rawest and most brutal fight I've ever seen. They just don't make them like they used to, do they? Green Goblin beats Spidey's ass like it's a drum. And I love that. Not because I like seeing Spider-Man get beat up, but just because it's more realistic. You know, he's not walking around in an Iron Man suit and all that. He is a guy who takes a pumpkin bomb to the face and then gets the shit kicked out of him. And I like seeing that side of Spider-Man getting beat and then coming up from that. And then I also just like seeing just this brutal fight between two people. Like, it's not super cinematic at all. It's pretty rough, and I like that a lot. And both of them take hard hits. As I mentioned, Spidey takes a bomb to the face, Green Goblin gets a wall thrown on top of him, and then takes his helmet gets hit so hard, I think Spider-Man actually cracks through it at one point. Can't remember, but I'm pretty sure the helmet does take a beating in that fight. Not an easy fight. And you know the coolest part of the fight? There's no music. It's just the sounds of punches and kicks. And then Green Goblin dies. Because he was stupid. And here's the thing. Tell me if this is a nitpick or not. Green Goblin and Spider-Man were pretty close to each other. And the blades on the glider are really long. They went through Green Goblin and then they went through the wall and there was still space on them for someone to get impaled. So if the glider goes full speed and Spidey doesn't jump over it and it goes through Spidey, there's only about 2 seconds, not even 2 seconds, like 1 second for Green Goblin to get out of the way before he also gets stabbed. So I feel like he was dying anyway. There was no way Green Goblin was getting out of that. But Spidey does dodge it, and so Green Goblin dies in the most humiliating way a man can die. He gets hit in the balls.
Oh.
And that sets up Harry's arc for the rest of the trilogy, which it's certainly an arc. Now let's move on to the ending of Spider-Man, which is the best ending ever. It sets up the trope of Spider-Man movies all having funerals, and of the original 5 of the pre-Tom Holland, pre-MCU Spider-Man movies, only one of them does not have a funeral, and that's Spider-Man 2. After the funeral, we get one of the best lines ever in a Spider-Man movie, followed by him swinging through New York in this one continuous shot, which there's one swinging scene that has given me more chills than that one, but we'll get to that when it's time. And just like everything else in this movie, it is an iconic scene. And before I grade the movie, I of course have to mention Danny Elfman's score. Danny Elfman didn't just understand the assignment. Danny Elfman created the assignment. He made the best Spider-Man theme and the best Batman theme, and they are unmatched to this day. I am going to give Spider-Man an A. I love Spider-Man. One of those feel-good movies, just pop it in every once in a while. It's a great film. I love rewatching it. And then Sam Raimi came back for Spider-Man 2. And to quote Tobey Maguire,
he whooped the first one's ass.
Let's see who's behind the mask.
Spider-Man 2 is one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. It has one of the best stories in a comic book movie. It has one of the best villains in a comic book movie. It has one of the best action sequences in a comic book movie. Almost everything about this movie is perfect. And let's talk about Peter Parker in this movie. This is just poor man. I had a writing teacher last semester who was absolutely right in this assessment. She said that one of the best things you can do for your story is to essentially put your protagonist in a tree, and instead of helping them down, you just throw apples at them, and then you watch them overcome their obstacle as the story unfolds. And yeah, I think she's right with that metaphor. But I think she should simplify it and just call it doing the Spider-Man 2. Anything that can go wrong to Peter Parker in this movie goes wrong. His life absolutely sucks in this movie. He is having a bunch of trouble balancing being both Peter Parker and Spider-Man. He's failing school, he can't get a job, his relationship with MJ, or his friendship with MJ, is starting to fall through. Same with his friendship with Harry, because Harry's mad that Peter takes pictures of the man who he suspects killed his father. Aunt May is broke and is about to lose the house. Peter has even worse money problems than Aunt May. He also gets paid to basically slander himself because he has to take pictures to give to Jameson, that Jameson then prints in the newspaper to antagonize Spider-Man. And on top of all of that, he loses his powers. And all the stuff I just mentioned doesn't even have anything to do with Doc Ock being in the movie. Now, what would make Peter's life better would to stop being Spider-Man, but he doesn't stop being Spider-Man. It's not because he wants to be Spider-Man. It's pretty clear in this movie he doesn't want to be Spider-Man. Spider-Man just absolutely ruins his life. So he doesn't do it because he wants to. He's Spider-Man because he feels like he has to be Spider-Man. Because with great power comes great responsibility. It's a message I didn't understand when I was little. And that might be why I didn't like Spider-Man 2 as much as 1 and 3 when I was little. Because it didn't have as much action. Because it was just about just a lot of talking and story. And I didn't like that when I was little. But now those are all my favorite parts. Yeah, Peter is just, I mean, he has a great storyline in this movie. He's a great character. But you know who's not a great character? Mary Jane Watson. So MJ likes Peter. Peter likes MJ. We know the drill. But at the end of the first movie, Peter rejects MJ because he doesn't want to put her in harm's way. Because if anyone ever finds out he's Spider-Man, what will happen in the first movie will happen like every couple days, and that's her getting kidnapped and put in harm's way and all that. And so in this movie, Peter just keeps trying to not be in a relationship with MJ. He's just trying to be her friend. But Spider-Man keeps getting in the way. And he can't tell her that he's Spider-Man, and she keeps getting upset about why he's being the way he is, and he just can't tell her anything, and he really wants to, but he can't. And then MJ is kind of just a dick about it. She's not really that supportive. I don't know. He seems like he's going through some stuff, MJ. Maybe help him out if you care about him so much. And stop asking him to come to your show multiple times. First off, why are people going like 8 times? See it once, twice if you really like it. A third time maybe just for shits and gigs. But don't go again after that. How many times do you need to see the same play? It's the same thing with movies. People see movies 10 times in theaters. By the time you see it the 10th time, it's just out on Blu-ray. Why are you seeing it that many times? I saw Infinity War 3 times, okay? It's the limit. Do not see a movie more than 3 times. Don't see anything more than 3 times. And the longer it is, the less you should see it. Do you know how long plays are? Stop going. But what does MJ do? There's a ceremony for J. Jonah Jameson's son, John Jameson. That family really likes J's. What's the mom's name? Like Jacqueline Jameson? But that's not the point. The point is, MJ and Peter talk and he won't tell her anything. So what MJ does is she goes back inside and she accepts John Jameson's proposal. Now, a lot of people say she was just doing this to be petty, that she basically screwed both guys over because she only did it to piss off Peter. But That's not really true. The movie makes it clear that MJ does like this guy, but I think her accepting the proposal in the moment was because she was pissed at Peter. So either way, it's kind of dickish. But she does like the guy. That much is clear. But then she makes this poor, sweet man do the upside down kiss with her because she likes Spider-Man more than him. And then she abandons him at the altar of his own wedding. Someone should have told MJ that she's a terrible person. Would have been funny in the third one if Jameson hated Peter because he stole MJ from Jameson's son. That would have been funny as hell. Although that would be another thing that was in Spider-Man 3. MJ hatred aside though, one of my favorite scenes in a superhero movie is when MJ figures out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Now, I'm going to play 2 scenes for you, and don't even let me know which one's better, because I already know which one you're going to pick, because one of these is infinitely better, and the other one is from Spider-Man Far From Home.
MJ,
I'm Spider-Man.
What?
That's what you were gonna say, that you're Spider-Man.
No. I'm not Spider-Man.
Something you guys will learn in my Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 review, coming soon to an MCU HQ YouTube channel near you, is that I love scenes where just a bunch of information is conveyed to the audience in like 5 seconds without a single line of dialogue being spoken. And that's what happens here. In just a few seconds, they don't even say any lines, but they just look at each other and it all clicks. MJ learns why Peter wasn't with her and why he was trying to keep to himself and why he had missed everything. And it basically ties up his arc of the movie. It ties up the whole film. And they don't even need to say a line. They don't even need to say a joke. The movie just takes itself seriously. It's not there to make us laugh. It's there to be a good movie. And you know what that scene is? That is the writing of Mr. Alvin Sargent. Great writer. Rest in peace. We'll be talking more about you in the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man video. So we talked about the worst character in this movie. Now let's talk about the best character in this movie. Dr. Octopus, played by the great Alfred Molina. Doc Ock, I mean, everyone said it at this point. He's one of the best villains in a comic book movie. He's so cool. We're also going to be seeing him again in less than a month. Hell yeah. And Alfred Molina plays the shit out of Doc Ock. And did you know that for a lot of shots when he's kind of standing around, the arms aren't CGI. In action, they're CGI, which, by the way, the CGI in this film is better. Every film in this trilogy is a step up in terms of CGI. But they were puppets, and there were puppeteers on the arms controlling them. They just don't make them like they used to, man. The single best scene in this movie and the single best scene in the trilogy and one of just the best scenes in a superhero movie. I've been saying that a lot in this video. I'm not done. One of the best scenes is the train scene from start to finish. And it's really the final battle of the movie because the actual final battle is more of Peter Parker versus Otto Octavius, whereas this is Spider-Man versus Doc Ock. And there's such a good attention to detail. It's not just like a fist fight. There's some fun stuff they do in there that you don't necessarily always notice. There's one where they're fighting on the side of the train and Spidey starts to slip and he casts a web to brace himself on 2 sides so he can regain his balance and then gets back to fighting Doc Ock. Of course, when he goes between the trains is great, and I've always liked when he gets kicked off the train and he like snowboards behind it. But you know what I hate is the driver of the train who asked for Spider-Man's help. He's the one who told Spidey to come help, and then when Spider-Man tried to help, he had the audacity to say this.
Any more bright ideas?
I have an idea, asshole. Why don't you go try to stop the train? Oh, you don't want to? Yeah? Then stay back and let Spider-Man do his thing, alright? Dick. Of course, the scene when he's getting passed back along the train in Jesus Christ mode while the responsibility theme plays is just the dictionary definition of perfection. And it can't be beat. There's no technology. There's no AI glasses. He doesn't need help from anyone else. He's just him being a superhero. And after it, they see his face and someone says,
He's just a kid. No older than my son.
and it's a really cool line, and then you start laughing when the camera cuts back to Tobey Maguire and there's just a 30-year-old man laying on the floor. Hey, can I talk about Aunt May for a second? I said that Rosemary Harris is my favorite Aunt May, but I didn't really go into it earlier because I was saving a lot of the talk about her for this movie. She has some amazing scenes in this movie, best scenes in the trilogy type stuff. Every scene in this movie is one of the best scenes in the trilogy, I'm sorry. So she has that scene with Peter where he reveals that he was at least partially responsible for Uncle Ben's death. A scene that has really become, I mean, not even exaggerating here, not kidding in any way, a scene that has become one of my favorite scenes. But then there's when she's moving and she says to the audience and directly to Peter why Spider-Man means so much to so many people, and it makes you think that she might know that Peter is Spider-Man, but she doesn't say it. It's just subtle enough to make you think it's not on the nose one way or the other.
I believe there's a hero in all of us that keeps us honest, gives us strength, makes us noble, and finally allows us to die with pride, even though sometimes we have to be steady and give up the thing we want the most, even our dreams. Spider-Man did that for Henry, and he wonders where he's gone. He needs him.
There's also that great scene when Peter doesn't know what to do and he has this vision with Uncle Ben, and then it leads into him deciding not to be Spider-Man anymore.
I'm just Peter Parker. I'm Spider-Man. No more.
And then it is the exact frame from the comic. But the movie's not perfect. I do have some issues with it. Some of these are nitpicks that I can get over when I watch the movie. I don't even pay attention to them. But I'm going to mention them here so that way I can immortalize my opinion on YouTube for people to hate it for years to come. This one's not a nitpick. This is legitimate. When Harry sends Doc Ock to capture Spider-Man, he gives Doc Ock a very specific and very clear set of instructions.
Don't hurt Peter!
But that's only half my issue, alright? I'm willing to cut Doc Ock some slack because he probably wasn't listening. Those arms are really loud and he was on a mission. But here's my issue. Doc Ock does not know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. He does not know that Peter has powers. And at this point, Peter doesn't know that Peter has powers. But Doc Ock decides to start this questionnaire by throwing a car at Peter Parker's face. So if he didn't have spider sense, his head would have gotten chopped off by a car, and there goes Doc Ock's information and Doc Ock's tritium. Something else that a lot of people take issue with is how many hits Doc Ock can take. This is a nitpick, I can look past this, but the idea is Doc Ock's not a super soldier. He's just a guy with metal arms, and Spider-Man's punches are really tough. Spidey actually has to pull his punches or else he'll punch people's heads off. That's how strong he is. But pulling punches or not, a normal man cannot take as many punches as Doc Ock takes. I think it probably would have been cooler if the arms always blocked the hits, and every once in a while when Spidey hit Doc Ock, he would be incapacitated and the arms would have to step in and defend him while he got up, because we know the arms work independent of Doc Ock, so when he's down, the arms can still fight. Just a bit more of that, but we don't watch these movies for realism. Spidey also tried to kill Doc Ock several times. He throws a giant metal clock hand at Doc Ock's face. So, I mean, I guess that's karma, though, for throwing a car at him, so I'll let it slide. And my last and legitimate issue with this movie is the burning building. I get its purpose in the story, but it just feels like an unnecessary rehash. Like, we just had a burning building in the first movie. We don't need another burning building. But those negatives aside, Spider-Man 2 is a great movie. It's one of the best superhero movies. It's my favorite live-action Spider-Man movie. If Into the Spider-Verse didn't exist, it would be my favorite Spider-Man movie. But I'm going to give it the same grade, because I do have some issues. I'm going to give Spider-Man 2 an A. Alright, people. Let's talk about Spider-Man 3.
This could be the end of Spider-Man.
So if Young John had reviewed this movie, Young John would give this movie an A+. Young John loved Spider-Man 3. Adult John does not love Spider-Man 3. But before we talk about that, let's just talk about how perfect the poster for the movie is. They just don't make them like they used to. It's a hell of a lot better than whatever this is. Yes, Spider-Man 3 is a mess. There is no denying that. It's a movie that would have been just as amazing as the first two movies in the trilogy if Sony did not interfere with it to add Venom and try to sell more toys and appeal more to kids. But they did, and we got Spider-Man 3. And the studio interference in this movie was so bad that Sam Raimi was nervous to come back and do Doctor Strange 2 because of what he went through on Spider-Man 3. 14 years later, and he was still afraid of working with superheroes. Sony, what did you do to the poor man? But I do not hate Spider-Man 3. I actually have started to appreciate it more. I went through a period there, because I loved it when I was little, then I went through a period where I was like, this movie isn't good. But now I've started to appreciate it more and more and what it was trying to do. And as much stuff as it did wrong, it also did a lot of stuff right. And I think that in a way it is a very worthy and satisfying conclusion to the trilogy. I cannot get into the good stuff in Spider-Man 3 before I mention how much shit is in this movie. Peter wants to propose to MJ. And then they start having relationship problems. And then Harry gets in on the mix. And there's this very creepy, possessive love triangle. And then you have Peter's ego starting to take hold of him. And he'll do stuff like kiss Gwen Stacy in front of MJ. And not think there's anything wrong with that. And then Sandman comes onto the scene. And it's revealed that Sandman was the one who actually killed Uncle Ben. So now Uncle Ben's story is relevant again, and now Peter has a revenge plot. But Sandman also is only a bad guy because he was trying to get money for his daughter, but Spider-Man has to stop him. And then you have the symbiote in this movie that literally just spawns into this movie with no setup, lands on Earth. So you get the entirety of the black suit storyline from start to finish. So Peter becomes a dick, he gets the black suit, and with the black suit comes Venom. So then Venom comes into this movie for the last 30 minutes so that he can be the final boss. But then there's another villain in this movie because Harry Osborn discovers his dad's lab at the end of the second movie and becomes the new Goblin in this movie. And then he gets amnesia at the start and then has to fast track his arc from the first two movies inside of this movie so that he can become a villain again, get his ass kicked again, then become a hero, then die. That's a lot of stuff in a 2-hour and 19-minute movie. Now let me tell you the plot lines I liked in this movie. Peter's storyline, him having a New York-sized ego, I think was a smart play going with that. I think that worked. Could have been cooler if they were able to devote all the time to it, but they couldn't. The movie starts not with Peter swinging through New York, but with Peter watching video of Spider-Man swinging through New York, and then talks about how much people like him, and then his first on-screen line in the movie is telling the kids to wait so it can start over. I also like Sandman. Sorry. I really like Sandman. No. I love... Still not there. Still not there. That's it. Sandman is the redeeming aspect of this movie, and if he wasn't in it, this movie would probably be like a D minus. But luckily, Sandman is in the movie, so the title of Worst Spider-Man Film does not go to Spider-Man 3. No, it doesn't go to you either. Every time Sandman's on screen, I'm emotionally invested, and the best part about Sandman is that he's not a villain of his own making. He is a villain because the American healthcare system sucks. And Sandman has one of my favorite scenes in the movie, which is the morning after he turns into sand and he's trying to find the locket and he's trying to grab it because his daughter is all he has. And the score in that scene. Danny Elfman did not return to finish the trilogy. Apparently didn't have the best time on Spider-Man 2. So instead they brought in Christopher Young to score this movie. And he did great. He wrote some great music that fits very well with Danny Elfman's style for the first two movies. So it seems like continuation, not like a composer change. I always forget it was a different guy. And the Sandman theme is fantastic. And the sound effects are really good. As I mentioned, the CGI gets better every movie. And besides the fight with New Goblin where they're like going through the alleyway that looks really bad, the CG is pretty good in this movie. And the movie retconned the death of Uncle Ben to have Flint Marko be the one who killed him. Was that necessary? No, it was not. Will I get over it? Yeah, because I get what they were going for, and I appreciate it just because of how the movie ends. It ends really well. We'll talk about the ending. And Sandman's the only villain in this trilogy that gets to live, so that's a title none of the other characters and none of the other villains in this trilogy got. But Sandman ain't the only villain in this movie. And that's my issue with this movie. Because if it was just Sandman and then Peter's ego, wow, this would be a really good movie. And Sandman should be the only villain just because of how critical he is to the main theme of the movie, which we'll get to. And the other villains just take the focus away from Sandman, which sucks because he's the best character in the movie. All right, Venom. Venom is a villain I like. Not in this movie, though. So the symbiote randomly lands on Earth like it's a Transformer. And the fact that this movie and Transformers came out the same year makes that really bad joke work better. And then it attaches to his little motorbike and hangs with him for about like 45 minutes, just sitting there, before it decides to attach to him and give him the black suit when he's at his lowest low, which is a cool little tidbit. And I will say that the reveal of the black suit is a really good scene. But then Peter becomes a bigger dick than anyone could ever become. And then Peter becomes a bigger dick than he already was, and he starts like dancing through the streets, and he goes to a jazz club with Gwen Stacy just to make Mary Jane jealous. And I'm gonna be real, that's the last I'm talking about that. And oh yeah, Gwen Stacy was in this movie. People just kind of leave the movie at certain points and come back, and Gwen Stacy's one of them. But then Peter punches MJ, which is a jaw-drop moment, and then realizes how big of an asshole he is, so he goes to a church and he tears the symbiote off him, and it lands on Edward Brock Jr., who is down below and had just finished asking God to kill Peter Parker, when from the heavens a black goo came and then gave Eddie Brock the power to kill Peter Parker. So I guess he got what he wanted. And then Eddie becomes Venom. And here's the thing. I get what they were going for with Venom, but bad casting decisions aside, this is not a good Venom. Thing is, so they wanted Eddie Brock to kind of be the anti-Peter Parker, but the issue is that that's what the point of symbiote Peter Parker is. So I don't know why they then had to do it again. If you took Venom out of this movie, it's the exact same, because without the symbiote, you still get a Peter Parker who's a dick. So the only thing that would change if Venom wasn't in this movie is that the movie would be a lot better. And about Dick Peter Parker, so the idea is that Peter's been Spider-Man for a few years now, and everyone loves him, and his ego is starting to get him, and he starts to put himself first a lot of the time, and that leads to him doing things like kissing Gwen Stacy in front of MJ because he doesn't realize what's wrong with that. You know, this is Peter Parker. He was never popular. Now he is, and he thinks that this is perfectly normal behavior and that people are fine doing this. But speaking of MJ, her arc from the second movie is just absolutely nuked in this movie. The ending of the second movie was about her saying that she is fine dating Spider-Man, and she's fine with all the baggage that comes with being in a relationship with Spider-Man. And then this movie starts, and she's like, I hate being in a relationship with Spider-Man because the whole world revolves around Spider-Man. And then there's everyone's favorite character, the New Goblin. When I was little, I liked New Goblin. I thought New Goblin looked cool. He doesn't. The New Goblin starts the movie as a villain because he thinks that Peter killed his father. And then he fights Peter like almost instantly into the movie. It's really quick, which is a good way of knowing there's too much stuff in your movie. But then Peter clotheslines him, and I think Harry hits his head like on 8 different things, gets amnesia, so he forgets being enemies, and he's friends with Peter and MJ again, but then he gets his memories back, and now he's New Goblin again. Basically, they benched Harry the entire movie because they had Spider-Man and Venom, so they were like, well, if we just get rid of Harry for most of the movie, we could focus on Spider-Man and Venom and then bring Harry back. And it's pretty clear this movie was supposed to be just Harry and Sandman, and Venom screwed everything up. So when Harry gets his memories back, he then decides he's gonna have a hand in screwing up the whole Peter and MJ thing. And so he forces MJ to break up with Peter and say that she fell in love with Harry. And the rapey vibes are not suitable for children. And all MJ had to say was, hey Peter, you kicked his ass before, kick his ass again, and then mission accomplished, we can go home. There are so many characters in this movie that, as I mentioned, they will just leave the movie for long periods of time. They'll leave for like 45 minutes, then come back later. Gwen Stacy sees Peter at the dinner he has with MJ, then leaves, and then comes back for the jazz club scene. I always forget Sandman is in this movie after Spider-Man beats him in the sewer, and then he shows up like an hour later and then just absolutely just clobbers Venom. And then Harry gets hit in the head, leaves the movie for a bit, gets hit in the head again, and leaves the movie for a bit, then gets hit in the head a third time, stabbed through the back, and then leaves the movie permanently. I don't hate the movie, though. I honestly don't think it's as bad as people say it is. And it has, I think, what might be my favorite moment of the whole trilogy. Now it's time to talk about the final battle of Spider-Man 3. The final battle is stellar, but I don't like that Mary Jane is a damsel in distress for the third time in the trilogy. It was fine in 1, it worked for the story. I don't know why she was a damsel in distress in 2. She was only kidnapped in 2 so that she could learn Peter was Spidey. And you know what? That's a great moment, I'll let fly. Why is she kidnapped in 3? I know that the original plan for the movie was to have Gwen Stacy get kidnapped and Peter and Harry had to save her. Why didn't they just do that? Was it just so they could have MJ there when Harry died? I don't know, but I didn't like it. And Kirsten Dunst didn't either. She refused to do the screams, so they had to take audio from the first and second movie. They had to take screams from those movies to put in this movie. But I digress. So Spider-Man goes after her when she's taken hostage, And can we talk about two scenes that Little John did not like? It was the scene when he lands in the sand pit and it just starts growing and just keeps growing. I was kind of scary. And then the scene when Venom and Sandman beat up Spider-Man, I didn't like. Before Captain America lifted Mjolnir, we had New Goblin coming to help Spider-Man. So it's a 2-on-2 fight. You got Spidey and New Goblin. I'm gonna stop calling him New Goblin. I hate the name. You got Spider-Man and Harry versus Venom and Sandman. And I think there's some really cool stuff in here. First of all, the takedown on Sandman is great. I love how many creative things there are in the fight with Sandman. Like when Harry uses the thruster to turn Sandman's arm to glass and then he shatters the arm. And the little horror movie bit when Sam Raimi goes back to his roots, the horror movie bit where Venom is screeching and Spidey's trying to find him. For anyone like me who was confused way back when, the reason that Peter can't detect Venom is because when Peter had the symbiote, it adapted to what he does. So when it went on to Eddie, it knew his tricks, so it can't get detected by Spidey sense. So Peter had no clue where the hell Venom was. That's so cool. I wish I was in the movie. It would have taken one line to mention that. And of course, Harry's death. Harry's death is great. And it's so poetic that Norman and Harry both died the same way, but Norman died trying to kill Spider-Man while Harry died saving him. It's like he made the Goblin name a heroic thing, not a villainous thing. The movie has 4 endings, 3 of which are for each main villain of the movie. And each of them have to do with forgiveness. That's the theme of the movie, by the way. As mentioned, the movie wanted to do a Peter versus Dark Peter storyline with Venom. If Peter has great power and great responsibility, Eddie has great power but none of the responsibility, and so he's not willing to let go of that power and he gets vaporized for it, right? He didn't get forgiveness, he didn't seek it, he didn't give it. There was no forgiveness in Eddie Brock's future, so he gets a brutal death for it. The scene when Peter forgives Sandman legitimately makes me want to cry. They just don't make him like they used to. Sandman doesn't want forgiveness, he just wants Peter to understand, but Peter forgives him because Peter needs it, because as Peter said,
I've done terrible things too.
And that's one of my favorite lines in the movie. And then with Sandman forgiven, he gets to fly off into the sunset peacefully, not aggressively. And that brings us to Harry. He gets to have this moment with his friends. And he and Peter hated each other in this movie. They both tried to kill each other at one point. But Harry isn't gonna die with that on either of their consciences. So it's just incredible. It's just such a good ending.
Never for you. Said those things.
None of that matters, Peter.
You're my friend. Best friend.
And then Harry gets to die not as a villain, but as the hero who saved Spider-Man. And it's done to the backdrop of a great piece of music and one of the most beautiful shots in the trilogy. And then there's a funeral for Peter, and not including the song MJ sings, because I don't count that, these are the last lines of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy.
It's the choices that make us who we are. And we can always choose to do what's right.
That's the other theme of the movie, by the way. But the movie isn't over. There's one more ending. There's the Peter Parker and Mary Jane ending, because that's not been wrapped up yet. Well, Sam Raimi knocked that out of the park too. It's not a heroic ending of Spider-Man swinging through New York with music blasting. It's a much more personal ending. Because this isn't the ending of Spider-Man's story. This is the ending of Peter Parker's story. Peter walks into the club where MJ works. She's singing, and he's in the first row. And then she comes down, and she dances with him. And the last shot of the Spider-Man trilogy is the two of them dancing. Sorry that I went into that deep of a talk about the ending. I just love the ending so much. I had to talk about it given the opportunity. Spider-Man 3 has a lot of issues. I mean, a lot of issues, but it has enough good that I still think it's a worthy conclusion to the trilogy, and I am going to give Spider-Man 3 a C+. Now, this is a hot take, but I really do not want Spider-Man 4, because I feel like Spider-Man 3 ended not just the movie perfectly, but the trilogy perfectly. At the very end, he gets the girl. The girl that the whole trilogy's been about.
This, like any story worth telling, is all about a girl. That girl. The girl next door. Mary Jane Watson.